The march began on foot. 76,000 American and Filipino prisoners of war, stripped of their equipment and most of their food and water, were ordered to walk 65 miles north under the Philippine sun to a railhead at San Fernando. The Japanese soldiers guarding them had received no instructions about keeping them alive, only about moving them. What followed over 11 days in April 1942 would become one of the most documented atrocities of the Pacific War and a defining image of Japanese treatment of prisoners that shaped American public opinion for the rest of the conflict. Men died of bayonet wounds, gunshot, heat, thirst, and disease. Others were beheaded at random or buried alive or simply left to die in the road. The guards called it a march. The survivors called it something else. On the 9th of April, 1942, the largest surrender of American military forces in history took place on the Bataan Peninsula in the Philippines. More than 11,000 American soldiers and 66,000 Filipino troops laid down their arms to General Masaharu Hama's 14th Army after a 99-day siege. The Philippines had been attacked on December 8, 1941, hours after Pearl Harbor, and the combined American-Filipino force under General Douglas MacArthur had retreated to Bataan in early January, knowing resupply was impossible. MacArthur himself departed for Australia in March on direct orders from President Roosevelt, leaving General Jonathan Wainwright in command of a garrison that was by then surviving on 1,000 calories a day. When Hama's final offensive broke the defensive line in early April, the men who surrendered were not defeated soldiers. They were sick, starving skeletons who had held on for 3 months beyond what any planning document had suggested was possible. General Hama had anticipated capturing roughly 25,000 prisoners. The actual number was nearly 6 times that. His rear area logistical organization, medical supplies, food stocks, water distribution, holding facilities had been planned for a fraction of what actually appeared. Whether the horror of the march that followed was deliberate policy from Tokyo, a failure of planning and discipline in the field, or both, historians have debated for 80 years. What is not debated is what the guards did. The columns moved north on Route 7 and Route 9, through villages that offered food and water to the passing prisoners and were sometimes beaten back by guards. Men who fell were kicked or struck with rifle butts. Those who could not rise were bayoneted where they lay or moved to the roadside and shot. Prisoners who knelt to drink from contaminated streams were dragged out and executed. Those who helped a fallen man risked being killed alongside him. Japanese vehicles drove through the columns without warning or pause. In the first days, prisoners witnessed killings for violations as minor as possessing Japanese currency, which guards interpreted as looting or making eye contact with a senior officer. At night, men were herded into holding areas, rice paddies, roofless enclosures, open fields, with no shade, no sanitation, and no medical care. Cholera broke out in the first week. Dysentery was universal. Men who had marched all day in tropical heat were given nothing to drink. At San Fernando, survivors were loaded into steel boxcars, 80 to 100 men per car designed for 40, and transported in temperatures above 100 degrees for the final leg to Camp O'Donnell. Men who died of heat or illness inside the cars remained standing, held upright by the press of bodies around them, until the doors opened at the destination. Camp O'Donnell was catastrophic. It had been a Philippine Army training facility. Built for 30,000 men, more than 54,000 prisoners arrived there. Latrines, water supplies, and medical facilities were all wholly inadequate. In the weeks after the march, Filipino prisoners were dying at 300 to 400 per day. American deaths ran between 30 and 50 per day. The exact death toll of the Bataan Death March and the initial captivity period is still disputed. Estimates range from 5,000 to 18,000 Filipino dead, and between 500 and 650 American dead, with different methodologies producing different numbers. Thousands more died in subsequent years in prison camps across the Philippines, Japan, and Southeast Asia. The outside world did not learn the full story until early 1944, when the War Department released accounts from 3 officers who had escaped from a Japanese prison camp in the Philippines. The public reaction was immediate. Newspapers across the country ran the testimonies. Recruitment offices reported surges. War bond sales spiked. The account of what had happened on Bataan crystallized something that had been building since Pearl Harbor into something harder and colder, an understanding that this war would not end in a negotiated settlement or a mutual accommodation. Japan's treatment of prisoners eliminated that possibility from American political thinking. General Hama was tried for war crimes by an American military tribunal after Japan's surrender, convicted of command responsibility for the atrocities and executed by firing squad in Manila on April 3, 1946. His defense, that he had not ordered the mistreatment and had not known the full extent of what was happening, was not accepted. The Bataan Death March did not change the course of the war in a tactical sense. Japan still controlled the Philippines. The strategic loss of Bataan had already happened. What the march changed was American will. Every soldier and Marine who fought in the Pacific after 1942 knew what happened on that road. The ferocity of American combat operations from Guadalcanal to Okinawa was not manufactured in training manuals. It came from Bataan. It came from 11 days, 65 miles, and the men who did not make it.